What do the diavel and the XDiavel have in common? According to Ducati, aside from 6 letters in their names, only brake calipers and tires. So, despite the similarities of the names, and even in profile, Ducati calls the 2016 XDiavel the company's first true cruiser. Don't think of this as a boardroom construction meant to fill in a particular checkmark on a manufacturer's list of necessary products. As Claudio Domenicali, the Ducati Motor Holding Spot Chief Executive Officer, said just this morning over breakfast, Ducati doesn't focus group its bikes to death. Instead, the company builds the bikes it wants, the bikes that scratch the creative itch, and lets the chips fall where they may. The heart of a champion. While the engine is always important in a motorcycle, in cruisers it is the crown jewel, the centerpiece of the bike's design while simultaneously being the heart of its functionality. The Ducati Strada DD1262 takes this to the extreme, in a most positive way. With the Multistrada 1200 engine as its starting point, Ducati's engineers massaged and reshaped the L-twin to a form more appropriate for Ducati-style cruiser duty. The 1262cc displacement comes courtesy of a longer stroke, yielding bore and stroke dimensions of 106.0 mm x 71.5 mm. 2016 Ducati XDiavel engine. Right side. The machined belt covers of the XDiavel highlight the L shape of the cylinders. The trellis frame and the swinger pivot assembly use the engine as a stressed member. Cruiser riders don't normally spin their bike's engine up to the RPM limit. Instead, they usually rely on the bottom end to work as the primary motivating factor. Ducati have clearly studied this phenomena and have moved to address this with the XDiavel. The result is a claimed torque peak of 95 pounds-feet at 5,000 RPM. While that RPM level may be a bit high for traditional cruisers, in fact, on many cruisers, that would be approaching the rev ceiling. The peak is significantly lower than on the previous diavel and then remains relatively flat until 7,500 RPM. However, what cruiser riders typically have not experienced is the soul stirring, deep intake howl emitted as the Strada's superb bike roots come online, thrusting the XDiavel forward with such force that they'll be thankful for the bolster at the back of the seat, since the feet and hands forward riding position gives the rider very little with which to combat the acceleration of their and upper body strength. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Compression was bumped from 12.5:1 on the MTS to a healthy 13:1 on the XDiavel. While the Bosch electronic injection system utilizes the same 56 mm elliptical throttle bodies, the ride-by-wire RBW has, not surprisingly, been completely reworked. Ducati being Ducati, the engine also has a host of electronic goodies to provide the rider with a variety of power delivery options. The 3 riding modes are Sport, Touring, and Urban, each of which also features distinct Ducati traction control DVC and ABS settings. The TFT display is easy to read in all lighting conditions, relating all the information needed at a glance. Here's where regular readers, who are familiar with my penchant for smooth throttle response, may be in for a surprise. In my quest for bobble-free on-off throttle transitions on the street, I am often willing to sacrifice a bit of power on the altar of smoothness. Frequently, I feel that RBW Sport mode is shorthand for abrupt mode, and normal is actually the most streetable setting. Well, the XDiavel lays that belief to rest. While we're on the topic of power, let's take a moment to consider the XDiavel's output. While Ducati's reps made much of the increase in torque in the bottom end of the RPM range when compared to the old diavel, and it was there, the XD still doesn't clear its throat until the touch clears 3,500 RPM. Below that, the engine will accelerate, but it also shudders as the cylinders try to deliver thrust from each power stroke. Above 4,000 RPM, it's ready to rock. The Strada's superb bike power plant gives riders the luxury of choosing 2 riding techniques. One can loaf along in a single gear rolling between 4,000 and 6,500 RPM content to use the engine as a giant rheostat, or if you're in the mood for some shenanigans, drop down a gear or 2 and let the L-twin pleasure you orally. However, the real joy of the XD comes from turning the loud tap to 11 and holding on for dear life. The new electronic feature that has been the topic of much discussion amongst the EMPO staff is the Ducati Power Launch DPL. This special launch mode is so cool that it gets its own button safely tucked away behind the front brake reservoir. Pressing the DPL button directs the rider to a screen with 3 choices. The first gives the least intervention in the form of DTC and wheelie control, while the third gives the most. Once the level of protection is selected, the screen tells the rider to place the transmission in first and crank the throttle WFO. Once you're underway, the electronics take over to save your butt until you either reach 74.6 miles per hour or 120 km/h or you shift to third gear. Also, it disengages if your speed drops to 3.1 miles per hour or 5 km/h. Other than stating that the DPL would only allow 3 launches before a prescribed cool-down period was enforced, the press briefing covered nothing else about this mode. The switchgear includes red LED lighting for easy night access. During one of the photo stops, I asked our ride leader if there was a place scheduled for us to try DPL for ourselves and was shocked to discover that we were not going to test it. The thought that I wouldn't get to test DPL began to eat away at the back of my brain, like a rat gnawing on wiring inside a wall. To work they too say that I shouldn't fully test their new motorcycle's capabilities. I'm a professional. Our readers deserve to know. DPL is not that kind of launch control. Witnesses said, when they heard the engine roar, they turned their heads to see a cloud of tire smoke as the XDiavel's rear tire instantaneously snapped to the right. Although DPL is not true launch control, I can't firmly say that the DDC interceded on my behalf. Upon realizing my mistake, I immediately pulled in the clutch, but without the electronic assist, I would have started the 2016 testing season with a bang. Then whoops. And, I'm sure, a bunch of explaining. Instead, it was just a stratospheric adrenaline hit and a vigorous finger shaking by the Italian ride captain telling me that a second attempt would not be tolerated. Suitably chastened, I got back in line for another photo pass. In summary, DPL requires human intervention on launch,